Raiders of the Deep. This is a new game published by Compass Games, and in this game you will play the role of the commander of a submarine in World War I, and it will try to sink as many enemy ships as possible. This is a solitaire game in which you play against the game system, and at the end of your campaign, the amount of enemy tonnage that you were able to destroy will determine your level of victory, of success, or failure. It is a game that can have very different length if you survive until the end of the campaign or you die early on. Of course, that makes a big difference. It is also a game based on a system that we've seen in other games about submarine warfare. The first game of this type was The Hunters, I believe. Later, we also had Silent Victory that was based on the same idea, and those were about World War II. Now we're in the Great War. Also, these games are in turn based on a classic of solitaire wargaming, which is B-17 Queen of the Skies, and that's probably the most well-known of all of these games. If you know that game, well, you know, it's a game in which you will roll a lot of dice and use a lot of different event tables to see what happens, what kind of encounters you have, whether or not you're successful in attacking, what happens to you, whether they hit you or not, what part of your vehicle or crew gets hit and what effects, etc., etc. B-17 and also the Hunters and Silent Victory are games that are somewhat very linear and also pretty complex. The mechanism is one. I mean, there's almost like one mega rule, which is roll on the next event table, and that event table will tell you where to roll next and implement whatever it is that you found there. But if you say it like this, it sounds pretty bland and boring. Of course, the fun comes from all the work that has been done in the organization of the charts and in the way in which, in fact, such a simple idea can bring a lot of theme to the experience of gameplay, and then all of that theme over a period of time in a campaign can create a very interesting campaign. Raiders of the Deep is based on the same idea, and I can tell you right now, if you like the Hunters or Silent Victory or the classic B-17, chances are you're gonna like this one because it's very close to its precedents, which is not a bad idea since the antecedents of this game are also good. So without further ado, let's take a closer look at Raiders of the Deep. In this game, you will play the role of a commander. You can create one from scratch, or you can use one of the historical commanders that come with the game. And you see the start date, the start submarine. Sometimes they transfer to other places. They have special powers. Interesting options here. Then, of course, you will be assigned a submarine. Each submarine will come with a sheet such as this one, where you will place a counter to indicate where the submarine is, maybe in port, maybe on a mission, and then you have places where you will add counters to indicate possible damage, torpedoes that are actually loaded and ready to go, reloads capability. And different submarines have, as you can already see, different combinations of things, different places that they can go, different periods of time that they can be in certain places. The more boxes you see on a certain track, the longer the mission in that area it will be. Different combinations of where their torpedo tubes are and how many they have and what their capability, where their reload capability is. And then you also have another area for technical things. So again, you will place markers to indicate damage to different parts of submarine and or your crew. And again, different models will have different combinations of things here. There is a healthy number of different models that come with the game. Each sheet is a different model, and these sheets are double-sided. So a lot of variety here, a lot of different models that you can experiment with. Really cool stuff. At the beginning of the game, you also need one of these log sheets here. There is a number that comes with the game. Probably you will want to make photocopies like I did here. This is a photocopy. You start the campaign wherever it is you want to start it. If you're playing a free game or if you're using an historical commander, then that will determine where your starting date is. You can also roll to determine a random starting date. And then your game will be divided in patrols. So it will be a patrol each month, and each patrol will be divided in a certain number of turns. So first thing to do when you have a new patrol is to determine where the heck you're gonna be sent. You will use this book here to determine that you will roll on a table, and that will determine the flotilla that you're sent to support for that month, and then you will check another table and determine what that means, so where you're gonna go. Suppose, for example, that we're playing a game where we have the UB3, we are going on the UB3, and we have been told that we're gonna go in the Mediterranean Sea to hunt for enemy ships to sink. So we will take a marker indicates the position of our submarine and we'll place it here. And then we will roll to see something happens to us when we are in transit. We roll on an encounter table. You have different encounter tables that indicate different possible targets in different parts of the war. Say here 1617. Late 14, early 15, and so on and so forth. So we check the table that corresponds to the date of the current patrol. We'll look at the column that indicates the place that we are patrolling, and then we roll to see what happens to us. So when we are here, we look at the transit column. When we are in the Med, we'll look at the Mediterranean Adriatic column. Suppose actually we're patrolling the English Channel. Very, very good hunting ground. A lot of stuff to be caught there. So we roll, and we see if nothing happens, or if we meet somebody, if we, say, find a number of ships or a capital ship, other things may also occur. The standard encounter will be a number of ships. So then for each ship that we encounter, suppose we encounter 2, we roll a die and we see if it's a small or large target. Then, here is super cool, we determine the exact tonnage of each of our targets, and if you want to play all historical and fancy, you can also determine the actual identity. You can find the name of the ship that you're targeting that actually is historical. It will correspond to a ship that was actually sunk in the month of the patrol that you're playing. That's pretty impressive. So you look at the in this book here on the target roster, and you look at the model that you are using. I remember one model I said, suppose that we are using the U31. No, that's not wrong section. So no, we look at the time that we are. Suppose, in fact, that we are in like 1916. We have a section for the small freighter target roster, and then a section for the large freighter roster. So we look in the section of the book at the month that we are. Oh, it's August 16, so we're gonna use this section here. August 16, we roll 2 dice, and we roll one number as the tens and one number as the units, and we determine the size, which is simply the number there, but again also the name if you care about that. That means that yes, in August 1916 there was a Clacton, and there was a Sphene freighter, and there was a Tottenham that was actually sunk. Pretty impressive. What matters for game purposes is how big the size, how big our target is, or our targets are. So we add that to the target tonnage section for the patrol that we are resolving. So we write there, say 1400 or 2700 or 2600, whatever it is, the tonnage. Then we move to the combat display. The combat display, we place, there you go. We place markers indicating the identity of the targets that we are attacking, say small freighter, and suppose that that month we also found a large freighter. We place them each on a different column and we place it in different boxes depending on the size. Each box represents a damage point, so time that you inflict a damage, you move the corresponding marker up by 1, and when it reaches the final box, that target is sunk. This is why bigger ships take more hits and they're in different boxes. The small freighters all take 2 damage points to sink. So now it is time for us to attack. You will have torpedo. You will have weapons on your torpedo tubes, different. And there are different types of torpedoes. Again, maybe here. In your reloads, and you decide if you want to attack with the forward and or aft. You can only attack with aft torpedoes at night, so actually you also roll to determine if your attack is taking place at night or during the day. Attacks at night are easier to perform, so if you have made contact with enemy ships during the day, you may choose to delay until night, but you roll a die to see if actually you can pull that off or they manage to lose you. So there is a chance that the attack will not happen at all if you're trying to go from day to night. You can use your aft and forward tubes in the same attack only if at night. You can also choose to be submerged or surfaced. If you're surfaced, you can also use your deck gun and you will spend ammo from it. Again, that ammo, the ammo markers that you have there only indicate how many you have in each attack, not how many you have in general. You also choose the range. The closer you are, the easier it is to hit, but of course it's also more dangerous if there is an escort. Yes, the encounter table may have also determined that your target is escorted, which makes things a lot trickier. In general, the general idea is that if there is no escort, then you simply attack, you unload as much as you can and won in a single round of combat. Then if there's still targets there, you can decide to pursue them and try to attack them again. But you also need to roll on a table to determine if stuff happens in between. For example, if an escort shows up then. So if there is no escort, pretty much you can do whatever you want. Or you can try to, of course. If there's an escort, things are trickier because the escort will attack you. If you attack at close range and there's an escort, then the escort will roll against you first. So it's possible that they will start attacking you before you get to attack at all, in which case your attack simply does not take place because you're too busy running away for your life. Otherwise, you get to attack and then the escort attacks you. Suppose that we are attacking, everything went well, hooray, then we'll look at this chart here that tells us what we need to do to attack. We roll a die for each torpedo from our tubes that we are spending in an attack, and depending on the range, we will have different hit or miss results based on 2d6. Modifiers may have to be taken into account. Each time that we hit, we make contact with a torpedo, contact with the enemy with a torpedo, and then we roll still to determine if the torpedo does anything or if it was a dud. For each torpedo that did hit and was not a dud, we roll on this table here to determine the actual damage. Deck guns also do damage, although there's a little bit of an abstract result because again there's a procedure that pretty much simulates firing at the opponent just to scare the opponent, to convince the crew to surrender, and they surrender, and then your men board the ship and they use explosives to sink it. It's an abstract way to say your gun destroyed the enemy. This is not what happened historically, but it's an abstract way of simulating that boarding procedure that I described, and that was started by scaring the opponent with the gun. And again, modifiers and other different pieces of information. There's all the good stuff when you attack it. That's it. This is the game. All right. Nope, of course not. There is the other element, which is when they attack you. The escorts will try to identify your location, and then you enter the attack cycle of the enemy. The very fact that it's a cycle should scare you, because when they figure out where you are and they start attacking you once, they will try to attack you as many times as they can. So you will roll on the escort detection chart, and again you have a nice player rate here with different types of table. The game is mainly player rates as you can imagine. You roll to determine if you're undetected, in which case, hooray, you can end the encounter if you so wish, or maybe you're still choosing to pursue some ships that were damaged but were not sunk yet. You're trying to deliver the final hit. You roll, when they're attacking you, you roll to determine if you're detected or not. If you're detected, then they will try to attack you, in which case you roll here to determine how many hits you take, and then for each hit, you will determine exactly what type of hit that is. A lot of theme happens here. I'd say most of the theme in the game happens here, with different parts of your submarine being hit and stopping to work, with the hull getting damaged, and you record that on your player rate, the one representing your submarine. You use markers to represent how much flooding you took, how weakened your hull is, what parts of your submarine are not working, which members of your crew were injured, and then depending on the damage that you took, you will also try to repair it, roll on more tables, etc., etc. This is the general idea, pretty much, is you determine where your patrol is. For each box in your patrol, you roll on an encounter table. You do have an encounter, you roll to determine who is in the encounter, how many, how big they are, whether they're escorted or not, other type of things that may happen, and then you resolve combat. You inflict a hit, and they attack you back if there's an escort, or inflict hits and you run away happily without having to worry, or you get caught and you have to run away without hitting. But this is the general architecture. You continue like this, box after box, until you go to port, and then your submarine is refitted. That is, you repair the system that were damaged. So you repeat this box after box, and month after month, until the end of the period in which patrols occurred in the war, or until you die, until you capture, which may occur much earlier. So because of that, a game may be pretty long or very, very short. You just don't know, and that fits well with the theme, I believe. So as I said in my introduction, this game really is reminiscent of its ancestors, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But for the fact maybe that if you played all of those other games, B-17, The Hunters, and Silent Victory, you're like, well, do I really need a variant of those? I don't know. Because it's still very, very similar. The experience, the flavor, the pace, the overall idea is very similar. You have a couple of new thematic things, of different things. Say you hear the enemies, when they attack you, they can try to ram you. That is something that happens still in World War I, when the submarines took a long time to submerge, and then it was a valid strategy for the enemy to just try to crash into you and cut your submarine in two. The idea that you're taking over enemy ships and then destroying them with explosives, or bringing them home as prizes for your nation. All of those are interesting new thematic elements. So if you're interested in the theme, of course, the two previous games were both about World War II. So here you get to discover a different variant of that idea. Again, sinking enemy ships and running from enemies is not all that different in World War I as it was in World War II. But I would say of these three games, Raiders, Hunters, and Silent Victory, this list is the one that feels the most different from the other two. The other two were more similar to one another than they are with this one, if nothing else because of the different historical scenarios. So what I like here, for me, although mechanically the game was very similar to the previous ones, what was particularly appealing to me is, well, this opportunity to discover a new historical situation, a new historical reality. And to me, actually, learning about history, seeing history in the making is a big draw towards playing historical war games. It is what makes it worthy for me to read these long rule books, definitely longer than those for most Euro games, moving around all of these charts and the player aids and tokens, just figuring out a way to organize the player aids around the table in a way that is convenient then to retrieve and to be able to know where everything is. That in itself is part of the challenge before you even start attacking enemy ships. So, there is a certain pragmatic element that you have to take into account. Some of these games with all of these player aids can be a little laborious to play, but then the basic engine is very simple. And again, to me, the key idea is that learning about history from the perspective of the people that were there is so fun. It's such a powerful intellectual experience that makes it all worth it. So this is about, the fun of this game is specifically to see submarine warfare of the Great War. From the more general point of view, mechanically, this game is very similar to its ancestors, and that is perfectly fine because those were absolutely excellent, and this one also is. The level of detail, the level of thematic richness that emerges from the mechanics and the components of the game is absolutely exciting. It's almost hypnotic. Like, I feel like I'm there. It's like a portal, a time machine, really. And like in previous games, then you have all different things that may happen. Different people will get injured, different enemies will be encounters, and there's just a huge variety. The script may appear so basic, so simple, but yet there are just so many different ways in which it can play out, from attacks that seem like a no-brainer and then all of your torpedoes miss, or they all hit but they're all duds, or they hit and do some damage but then an escort shows up and you're to decide what to do. You have this delicious target and you decide to wait until night, and then the target vanishes before you can actually attack them, or you are at the end of a patrol, nothing happen, all of a sudden an amazing target shows up, or that what is tricky, an okay target shows up halfway through your patrol, and you're thinking, oh, what should I do? I could just decide to save all of my weapons for later, hoping for a better target, but what if then I don't find anything? Of course, then I'm gonna start firing at these guys. And then later, when my torpedo tubes are empty or have like one torpedo left, guess what? A fantastically promising target shows up, and now I have to decide if I want to go suicidal and try desperately a very unlikely target, etc., etc. So actually it is interesting because this type of game, the previous ones and this one too, Raiders of the Deep, have such a strong wargame feel. They feel some of the more wargamey wargames that I play, because I quite literally see people that get hurt. It goes to the individual. I know exactly what person got hurt and where and because of what part of the submarine stopped working, and then as I rolled to repair it, how it was finally fixed just for the time being so we could attack again later in the same patrol. It is just incredibly thematic. But at the same time, mechanically, it's almost like a Eurogame, because it really is about managing resources. It's a mix between a Eurogame and a push-your-luck dice game, which in a sense it is. It is a dice game, because really, pretty much the decisions that you make are what resources I'm going to invest, and there you have the Eurogamey element, to increase my chances of hitting, knowing also how that will increase my chances of getting hit. It is extraordinary to me how, thinking about it, it feels, in that sense, the engine of the game is much more abstract than, say, a map-based game in which I'm going on those roads and I'm protecting my lines of supplies and I'm surrounding you and I'm preventing you from retreating and trying to hit you as you retreat. those war games look more like war games than this one does, where you just have playwrights and dice and you're writing things down on a sheet of paper. It's funny almost how such an abstract engine really manages to create some of the most immersive atmospheres of historical simulation that I know of. This system is that I like very much. No pun intended with the immersive idea, as you're immersing yourself on the see what I did there. Anyways, I'm getting lost. Yeah, B17 is immersive too, although you're right there in the sky. The Sense is a game that is so abstract in general, relies on such abstract mechanics, and yet it gives you interesting choices. True, not many choices, because in a patrol you don't see anybody, then all you did was to roll and wait for the next patrol. When they start attacking you, there isn't much that you can do but to run, cross your finger, and say your prayers to whatever deity you worship. Because you're the target and they're attacking you. And things can change so fast from a patrol in which nothing happens to one where you do a little bit of damage and they destroy you entirely, or you do a lot of damage and you walk home triumphantly without breaking a sweat. So yes, it is a game with a lot of randomness and with limited decisions, but those decisions you really have the sense that they matter, that they're impactful. Although maybe they're not. Again, just because the randomness of how the enemy attack you, it's just so massive. But somehow, the part that you can control, you really get the sense that spending certain resources at the last time, at the right time, pays off. You really have a sense of agency in a world that is otherwise dominated by massive chaos and randomness, which really makes sense in a game with this scope, with this theme. You're not the leader of a campaign, of a huge front. You're one person inside a piece of metal under the sea, and that's what you can see, and that's pretty much the scope of your agency should be limited. Within the scope of agency, you have interesting decisions, and you have an interesting narrative that is constructed through a chain of encounters, or even of missed encounters. Again, there are patrols where nothing happens, but you feel something may happen. The sense of somewhat suspense is still there. So, Raiders of the Deep. If you like previous games in the system, I think you will like this one because it's very similar, which is a great thing considering that the previous ones were good too. If you had the other two, you have to consider whether or not this would be redundant to you. Mechanically, in a sense, it is. There aren't many differences. Thematically, is a different theater, it's a different period, so there is an element of difference there. In general, Raiders of the Deep, I enjoyed it very much, very, very much, and definitely it's a worthy addition to a system that has produced excellent games in the past, and now has a very good, excellent new chapter that just came out.